Before we talk about the Army in 1783, let's go over a little bit of background information. The American Revolution did not end with the Battle of Yorktown in 1781. The American Revolutionary War ended on September 3, 1783, when the United States and the British government signed the Treaty of Paris. The Treaty of Paris set the boundaries of the new United States of America, and it would not be recognized by most people today. This country only went from the Atlantic Ocean to the Mississippi River and down to Florida and up to Canada. The government of the United States was defined by the Articles of Confederation, written in 1777, and not by our modern Constitution. Congress struggled with what should be the peacetime army of the United States. They decided to turn this over to a committee to make recommendations to Congress, and to lead the committee, they appointed Alexander Hamilton. The prevailing view in Congress was that a well-maintained and disciplined militia was the best option for national defense, that a standing army could only be seen as a threat to the United States. Alexander Hamilton turned to George Washington for advice. Washington told Hamilton that he believed that a large standing army was dangerous in time of peace, dangerous to the liberties of a country, and that the nation was too poor to maintain a standing army adequate for our defense. Washington was in favor of the creation of a small regular army to awe the Indians, protect trade, prevent the encroachment of our neighbors of Canada and the Floridas, and guard us at least from surprises, also for the security of our magazines. This force, Washington believed, would only need to be about 2,600 men. Congress directed George Washington to discharge such parts of the Federal Army now in service as he shall deem proper and expedient. So, after the British evacuated New York City, George Washington discharged the entire Army of the United States except for one infantry regiment and a battalion of artillery. This was about 600 men in total, and they were to guard the supplies at West Point and other military posts. On December 23, 1783, George Washington resigned from the Army, said goodbye to his officers, and returned to Mount Vernon. Congress did not accept the recommendations of Alexander Hamilton's committee, and instead, on the last 2 days of their session in 1784, Congress finally decided to disband the existing infantry regiment and battalion of artillery that were still in the Army. They decided to keep only 80 existing artillerymen to guard the military stores at West Point and Fort Pitt, and then authorize a new force of 700 men, a regiment of 8 infantry companies and 2 artillery companies. This was the beginning of the peacetime Army of the United States. Congress then called on 4 states to furnish these troops. From Pennsylvania, they wanted 206 men. From Connecticut, they wanted 165 men. From New York, they wanted 165 men. And from New Jersey, they wanted 110 men. And Lieutenant Colonel Josiah Harmar of Pennsylvania was appointed the commanding officer of this new army. The country did face challenges from the Native Americans in the Northwest region. So, Colonel Harmar took his New Jersey contingent of this force and sent them to Fort Stanwix in New York to persuade the Iroquois to give up their lands. The remainder of the force was sent to Fort McIntosh, 30 miles down the Ohio River from Fort Pitt, with similar instructions to negotiate with the Native Americans in the upper Ohio region. In 1786, the country started to experience a deep financial depression, and unrest was starting to develop around the country, especially in Massachusetts, where they started to experience rioting and disturbances throughout that fall. So on October 20th, 1786, Congress responded by raising a new requirement for the United States Army. They called on several states to raise 1,340 men for a new augmentation to the Army that will be enlisted for a period of 3 years. Then, in January 1787, a group of men led by Daniel Shays attacked the Springfield arsenal, but a group of local militia were able to repulse this attack. This victory came before any of the men of the newly raised army could reach the area. Recruitment of this larger army continued until April 1787. At that time, they'd only raised about 550 of the men that were required to be enlisted, and the expense was starting to become burdensome to the states involved. So Congress decided to cease recruitment of the army and use the existing forces to guard the arsenals at West Point and the Springfield Armory. The United States government was realizing that the Articles of Confederation that they were currently operating under had severe problems. It did not have any executive branch to manage the army. Also, it did not have the ability to raise taxes and pay for the federal government. So in 1787, a constitutional convention was held. By September 18th, they had created the new Constitution of the United States, but this Constitution was not ratified by the states until June 21st, 1788. The Constitution established the new executive branch and the office of the President of the United States. The President was now going to be the Commander-in-Chief of the United States Army and Navy, although at this time the country did not have a navy. Then, in 1789, the first Congress of the United States passed a law that established the budget of the United States Army. That budget was only $1,785, and this act was approved by George Washington on September 29, 1789. No mention was made on how many troops were to be in the United States Army. Congress also created the Department of War in 1789, and General Henry Knox, who had taken command from General George Washington after he left military service, was appointed the Secretary of War. The next year, Congress passed the first act regulating the military establishment of the United States, which was approved by George Washington on April 30th, 1790. This act established the United States Army under the Constitution and set forth the numbers and organization of the Army. This Army would have the following structure. They would have a corps of artillerists. This corps would consist of one battalion of 4 companies for a total of 321 men. They also established the infantry, which would consist of 1 regiment. It would be divided up into 3 battalions. Each battalion would have 4 companies. The total number of men in this new infantry would be 960 men, bringing the grand total of the Army of the United States to 1,281 men. Then in June 1790, Secretary of War Knox ordered that General Harmar, in consultation with Arthur St. Clair, the governor of the Northwest Territories, lead an expeditionary force against the Miami Indian tribe in the Northwest Territories as a show of force. Governor St. Clair called upon Pennsylvania and Kentucky to send 1,500 militiamen to Harmar at Fort Washington, which is now Cincinnati. This untrained force of militia did not do well against the Miami Indian tribe. General Harmar took a force of 1,453 men and marched towards the principal Indian village, which is near what is now Fort Wayne, Indiana. After several encounters with the Native Americans, the untrained militia did not do well, and General Harmar decided to march his troops back to Fort Washington. This defeat of the American army and militia caused concern among those in Congress. In response to General Harmar's defeat by the Native Americans, Congress passed an act for raising and adding another regiment to the military establishment of the United States and for making further provisions for the protection of the frontiers. This act was signed into law by President Washington on March 3, 1791. This act increased the United States Army by 1 regiment, which brought the total number of authorizations for the United States Army to 2,246 men. Then, in 1791, Secretary of War Knox ordered a new campaign against the Native Americans in the Northwest Territory. In charge of this new campaign was St. Clair, the governor of the Northwest Territory. He gathered his army together, which consisted of 600 regulars, about 800 newly enlisted United States soldiers, and about 600 militia that he had gathered from the neighboring states. He took the majority of this force and marched out of Fort Washington towards the Native American villages. St. Clair advanced its force of about 1,400 men about 100 miles northwest of Cincinnati or Fort Washington. On November 3rd, 1791, his force was attacked early in the morning and caught by surprise by about 1,000 Native Americans. This caused chaos in the camp and a victory for the Native Americans. During the battle, 637 men under St. Clair were killed and another 263 were wounded. This could be considered a massacre. The defeat was so extensive. After the defeat of St. Clair, the United States Army was in disarray. President George Washington appointed Major General Anthony Wayne to take command of the Army. Wayne did not rush into the field. He spent the next 2 years recruiting, training, and reorganizing the Army into the Legion of the United States. Then, in the spring of 1793, he marched his new legion into the Northwest Territory, back down the Cincinnati River to Fort Washington. There, he tried to negotiate with the Native Americans. Despite his efforts, no agreement could be reached. Then, in July 1794, Wayne led about 3,000 men towards what would become Fort Miami. There he met the Miami Indian tribe, and the Battle of Fallen Timbers took place. This was the first American victory against the Native Americans in the Northwest Territory of what was then the United States of America.